While some design tasks can be carried out by individuals, most computer system development involves the coordinated activity of groups of people. As a project unfolds, it leaves behind a history, a rationale for decisions. Often this is embodied in storytelling among group members. In the Raison dEtre project, we collected these stories and examined the role they play in design decision-making. The project we chose to work on was one involving the use of interactive books in education. Work on the project was completed in about a year, and we were able to examine it from beginning to end. We conducted 3 interviews, 3 months apart. Each set of interviews was shot in a consistent setting in order to make it easier to recognize material from any one of the interview sets. The questions we asked were specific to what the members were working on at the time, as well as their recollections of the past and their expectations for the future. The result? The Raison dEtre project, an interactive means of studying the stories we'd heard. Across the top of the screen are icons of the people whom we interviewed. In the middle are icons representing categories of stories. Looking backward, project vision; looking forward, human issues and technical issues. Along the bottom is a timeline which uses color to identify each of the 3 interview times. By choosing one or more icons, we are choosing a set of video clips which illustrate, for example, Lynn Mark's view of the future.
The next major technical goal for the project is to implement 5 different types of browsers.
Notice that the video is surrounded by a frame of the same color as that representing the interview time in the timeline. This border, along with the interview setting, makes it easy for the viewer to tell when the comment was recorded. We can also query the system for a particular issue, such as scenario.
I would say a typical use scenario for the Interact system would be that a college professor had investigated materials that were available on the database and ideas that he had or she had.
For a project to succeed, there must be a clear vision of what it will accomplish. This vision is a collection of understandings of small and larger purposes. It's how the system will look to the end user. It's who will be able to use this system and what will that user be able to do. It's a single phrase or idea that everyone can agree upon and toward which they're willing to work. These visions supply direction and resolve for the group. And recording these visions promotes a deeper understanding for each project member of how their part fits into the bigger picture.
At the highest level, this project is about creating a new, fundamental paradigm for what computing is. The elements of this paradigm are massive interconnectivity, person to person, person to object. Objects are rich multimedia entities that either are capable of displaying themselves in interesting ways in isolation or as part of compositions. The project is about how do you find these things, how do you put them together, how do you do it collaboratively across a network, how do you publish for reuse such compositions, and so on.
Part of understanding where we are is understanding where we've been. A project isn't an event, it's a process, and each decision is built upon all of the decisions that have come before. In order to make a decision today, we need to be able to revisit old reasoning. And by recording decisions as they're made, we have access to rationale, not rationalization.
Originally, the project was going to concentrate on computer science.
And when we thought through computer science as a candidate domain, it just didn't seem like there was a good fit with our other goal of exploring multimedia. So we ultimately settled on engineering, something to do in the domain of engineering, and actually settled on engineering failures.
We thought specifically we would do a bridge collapse. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but Bob was thinking of having the bridge over the River Kwai and the music background going during this thing. We'd have to, copyrights are another horrible lesson I'm learning in this.
Not everyone has the same vision of a project. And not everyone has the same view of events within a project. A project leader sees an issue one way, a technical member another. This diversity is natural and well understood by designers and can be an important resource in design work. Recording individual team members encourages examination of the processes that lead to convergence or diversity of opinion. And with a greater understanding comes a greater possibility of sharing a common goal.
It quickly became apparent that many of the people in the design group wanted a domain that was more socially relevant, and we ended up looking at nuclear power plants and looking to build a multimedia information infrastructure on the pros and cons of nuclear power plants. And
perhaps the most important decision was the decision to go with aeronautical engineering as a domain rather than nuclear engineering. It's one it provides more material for our kind of work, but it's one that seems to be a more compelling and a more interesting one for target customers. Not too many people know the internals and the intricacies of what goes on in nuclear power plants, but almost everyone has flown a plane or cares about airports and aviation safety.
A project is a dynamic entity. People enter and people leave. One of the problems for a project is how to bring new members up to speed.
Well, I'm fairly new to the project, and
encouraging new members to browse project history allows them to watch the development of the project as well as that of the rationale. What we're providing with Raison dEtre is another means of documenting a project and a means to encourage people to create and look at that documentation. We know one reason that people need documentation is they forget.
Originally, the project was going to concentrate on computer science. Originally, the project was dealing with nuclear power.
They need to understand the impact of their decisions.
The change of topic didn't really cause any upset and any extra work for lexical systems, because as far as we're concerned, all we're doing is we're processing text. And whether we're going to process text about nuclear engineering or text about aero engineering, that really didn't matter, and we can now say, looking back, that it didn't matter at all.
And they need to understand what forces caused their decisions.
These meetings often began with saying, Allison, where's all this material so that we can begin our work? And Allison was telling us of difficulties she was having getting information out of Con Edison for Indian Point and other utility companies, which were reluctant to make a lot of information available because of the sensitivity of nuclear power.
We started out in a very cavalier, almost cowboy fashion, getting movies like the China Syndrome and Silkwood and so on, thinking, wow, this is just the kind of material we want to create a socially relevant, engaging, exciting courseware module on a particular category of engineering failure, which is nuclear power. Well, we very quickly discovered that in the real world, there are things like copyrights and people own materials, and you can't just go off and use this sort of material.
The Dictionary of Science and Technology, the Encyclopedia of Science and Technology, they're simply a better, richer description of aeronautic engineering than nuclear engineering. And it's purely a pragmatic point of view. We have more data. We can do better. This makes it better.
The ethos of work is to address the task at hand. Design work, like all professional endeavor, can sweep us into a narrow space of local and low-level concerns. To a great extent, it can be no other way. When the task at hand slips out of hand, one's sense of progress and purpose evaporates. What we hope to do with Raison dEtre is put the tools into the hand of the designers so that their task will never slip out of hand because they cannot adequately reflect on the work they are doing. We anticipate that the immediate contribution of Raison dEtre will be in education and research, where the vividness of the memory and the organization of the information will encourage the examination of the design process. With the participation of the entire design group, documentation can become a social process of narrative building, as well as of bonding. When these technologies become commonplace and can penetrate the inner loop of the design process, concepts and models for hypermedia rationale and history should be poised to create the future of design work.